We're going into a really interesting next section now around the importance of inclusive leadership. And I'm delighted that we're being joined by Jonathon Cole, who is the Offshore Managing Director for Scottish Power Renewables. Hi, Jonathon. Let me tell you a little bit about him. Jonathon works for Iberdrola Renewables as a member of the Global Leadership Team and Managing Director of the Global Offshore Business. Since 2011, he's acted as the Offshore Managing Director for Iberdrola Renewables and was responsible for the creation and management of Iberdrola's offshore business, including the development, construction and operation in projects around the world. He sits on the board of a number of industry bodies, and I'm fortunate enough to know Jonathon through his association with G+, but he's involved in many others too. And he joined the company originally in 2008, where he began life as the UK Legal Director and Commercial Director. So we have to be careful what we say. There's a lawyer in the room. Jonathon, welcome. Over to you. Really interested to hear your thoughts about inclusive leadership. Just need to pop you off mute.
Thank you very much, Louise. And it seems that no matter what I do, I can never get away from the fact that I used to be a lawyer. Okay, so I'm going to start my remarks here with a bit of a disclaimer, and probably any good speechwriter will tell you should never start a speech with a disclaimer. But I'm going to do that because although I work for a company that I would consider to be a very inclusive company, and although I would consider myself to be an inclusive leader, under no circumstances should it be taken that I am here today to tell you that I have the answers to the challenges of the day, nor am I suggesting that our organisation is where we want to be. No, we are very much on a journey, and what I'm really here to do today is to share with you how I see the context of that journey and the things that we're doing around that. Okay, so I'll start with the context. So Louise described a little bit about what I do. So I run an offshore wind business. It's a business we started up about 10 years ago. There were 4 people involved. We had about €4 million and a rough plan. And today, 10 years later, we're a business of about 600 people. We've got about €14 billion being invested in our project, and we're active in 10 different countries. So on most methods of measurement, we're very successful in terms of revenues, profits. But there's one metric that we haven't really made any progress on, and that's the metric of gender balance. Because we started that business 10 years ago with a ratio of 1 female out of 4. And here we are today, 10 years later, and we haven't moved on at all. We're still sitting at a ratio of 1 female out of 4. And in fact, when you look to the upper levels of our organisation, that drops 1 female in 5. So that's what I meant when I said we're certainly not where we want to be. Now, it's very easy for us, I think, to blame the legacy of the industry that we work in for that situation, because it's, I think, just a matter of fact that females are underrepresented in this energy sector. But to be totally honest with you, that's not good enough to do that, and especially when you are in the renewable energy part of the energy sector, because actually, if you look at the way in which our industry has grown, there are actually some interesting parallels between that and the topics that we're talking about here today on diversity and inclusion. Because the renewable energy industry was effectively born out of disruption. It was born out of the identification of a problem, climate change, and the recognition that something needed to be done to address that. But the renewable energy sector also faced some challenges in convincing the incumbents of that. And in fact, in the early days, we faced a lot of accusations about, not being up for the job and not being able to do what needed to be done. Of course, we proved people wrong. We then, fought very hard to change the system to, allow us to get into the market in a level playing field. And, eventually we won that fight. And we had to argue against the incumbents who, I guess, in the early days wouldn't acknowledge their own position of privilege and the fact that probably renewable energy needed a bit of support and help and assistance to get itself up onto the playing field and then to levelise that playing field. And we won those arguments, and now here we are today. Almost, you could say we are now one of the incumbents. So there's a real interesting parallel, I think, between that and the topic of discussion today. And it's one of the reasons why I would say we can't blame the legacy of our industry. We're an industry, the energy sector generally, which is transforming itself to solve a massive problem for humanity. And I think Einstein said you can't solve your problems using the same thinking that created them. And so if ever there was a time where we needed, the best of all talent, where we needed diversity at all levels, especially cognitive diversity, it's now. And if ever there was an opportunity to transform our workforce, it's now while we're actually transforming the whole way in which we produce and use energy. So I think the context is that this is absolutely the time to be doing more and being ambitious about what needs to be done and what can be done. So with that in mind, I'm just going to talk a bit about some of the things that I see as a leader in an organisation which is an inclusive organisation, but which has still got a long way to go. So the first thing that I see as being very important is you have to inspire everyone in relation to this change. I think, we've heard Ruth Bader Ginsburg quoted earlier on, and she said that you should fight for the things you care about, but in a way that inspires others to join you. And I think that's a really, really important point when we talk about this. I mean, I actually had a very interesting learning experience of my own a few years ago. So I run a team which I would describe as being a very liberal, very forward-thinking, very inclusive bunch. But we were invited to a workshop on diversity, and the heading of the workshop was male, pale and stale. Now, that didn't apply to me because I was much younger back then. But some people were very offended by it, and I was quite surprised actually at the reaction. But okay, you could say they were being oversensitive, and that's nothing compared to what other people have to put up with. But what it made me realise is that if we're going to make the change we want, we need these people to be fully engaged in the process of making this change. And if they somehow feel like they're part of the problem, not the solution, if they somehow feel like they have to be defensive on all of this, it's going to slow down the progress we want to make. So that was a really interesting learning experience for me, is that we have to be a bit sensitive to the incumbents in the way in which we drive change. And so with that in mind, the other measures that we take have always got a bit of that in the back of our mind as we do it. So the other things we do, we use data a lot in terms of how we assess what needs to be done. Most organisations in our sector are very data driven, identifying problems, identifying solutions, measuring progress. We've heard a few people kind of quote this maxim this morning already: if you can measure it, you can manage it. And so we do that. And actually, an interesting experience just this week, where National Inclusion Week, etc., on our global management meeting, we brought to the agenda our UK gender pay gap report. Now, that's not a report we need to compile for any other jurisdiction, right? Only for the UK. But we took it to this global agenda. We talked, by having that conversation and by shining a light on the issue in the UK, we were immediately seeing parallels in other countries. And by the end of the discussion, everyone was going away, going to think about what their own personal commitment was going to be to do something about that in their own part of the organisation. So, data is a great starting point for a discussion. And sometimes in organisations like ours, it really helps legitimise the discussion. The other thing, of course, we're doing is trying to attract diverse talent. And we've heard a lot of the measures that people are taking in other organisations that we do the same of, with our job descriptions and our job adverts and all the rest of it. Again, I mean, I've personally had the need to sort of intervene a couple of times in the whole process, though, particularly in things like shortlisting. So, for certain positions, we aim to have a gender balanced shortlist, right? We don't have quotas about the outcome of the process, but we certainly aim to have a shortlist which is gender balanced. And quite a few times over the past year, I've had to reject the first shortlist from the headhunter because I didn't think they'd made enough effort to bring enough, female talent onto the list. And on more than one occasion when we've done that, the people that have then been brought in have actually done very well in the process, and have been offered the job. So it's a really important thing to don't let people take the path of least resistance and really push. Interestingly, I got involved in a selection panel which was 5 men interviewing a woman on Microsoft Teams It was basically a stern cross-examination for an hour and a half. At the end of the interview, I mean, I certainly didn't feel like the opportunity to really show that, put a case forward had been given. And so we changed the process and we introduced another way of doing the selection process. So I think you have to be, really looking at the circumstances as they're evolving and really insisting on these things to make them happen. And you have to force the males in that process to think about these things, because otherwise the path of least resistance does tend to take you down a way that favours the incumbent. We do a lot of work on inclusive career development. We all know, the whole shy talent phenomenon around affects females particularly. And so in our company we have networks to support, but we make sure those networks are open not just to women but to men. We do mentoring schemes. Again, those mentoring schemes are available to everyone, but in the case of females, they're tailored to suit the particular needs of a female at that point in her career. But we do it in a way that doesn't seem like it's just a scheme purely to help women and to disadvantage men in any way. We also do this thing called nodding. I don't know if you're familiar with the term, where we basically tap someone on the shoulder and say, come and apply for this job. Often they might not get the job, often they might not be ready for the job, but the point is that they wouldn't even have put themselves forward if we hadn't done it, and they learn a lot from it and they get a lot of confidence from it. So we do these things, and I think they're all done in a way which is sensitive to the males in the workforce, but really helping the females. And the final thing that we do is flexible working for all. Now, in days gone by, flexible working was something that was done really to help working mums. And that was, the culture in companies like ours. But we recognise that work-life balance affects everyone. Again, to go back to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a great quote from her: women will only have true equality when men share the responsibility of bringing up the next generation. And so you have to have flexible working for everyone. We've implemented a scheme which we call Better Balance, which is basically changing our whole office layout into what we call an activity-based office, and changing the way we work into what we call locationally independent working. So these are nice kind of buzzwords. What it basically means is we're breaking the link between productivity and sitting at a desk. You go to the place where you're able to be most productive in the work, and that may not even be in the office. And we're also, starting to move to measuring outputs, not inputs. Measuring deliverables, not time spent in the office, etc. And all of those things are good for work-life balance. They're actually good for staff engagement and motivation, and they're actually very good for productivity. Now, interestingly, doing the furniture piece of that was quite easy. Doing the cultural piece was viewed to be a much longer-term journey. But what's happened with COVID has actually really accelerated that process and jumped us, I would say, forward at least 2 years in our plan, because now it's just normal practice to say that you can be productive at home and you can, we can have this flexible working environment. So those are some of the things that we do. But I say I'm trying to just to keep the theme here that we're doing this in a way which is inclusive for everyone. These are not just kind of things that are designed only to help women. But I think the natural consequence is we end up with a motivated workforce who want to all push in the same direction. So we're in a really exciting sector. We're transforming the way we produce and use energy, and in doing that, we've got an opportunity to transform the way we work and how our workforce looks. So we are all the agents of change, men and women, and if we work on this together, I think we will not just create a cleaner, greener future, but one which is much fairer and much more inclusive as well.
I couldn't agree more. As you might expect me to say, Jonathan, that was brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. There's a couple of questions that have come in, so let me fire those to you. And I've got one of my own too, as I was listening to you speak. So the first one is, how much does implementing inclusion in a business depend on trust? And if so, what actions has your business taken to build trust?
Yeah, I think it's a really important part of any change process, is that you have to convince everyone that the changes you're making are for the greater good, and that where we will end up at the end of this is something that's going to work for everyone. And that means that you need to build trust in the male population, that they are it's in their interest to do this, as well as trusting the female population that we're working on this and we're trying to make this happen, but it's not an overnight thing and it takes time and all the rest of it. So I think trust is essential in this really long-term important process.
Yeah, no, I agree. And there's a second question that says, pay parity has been mentioned a couple of times this morning. Why aren't roles linked directly to pay irrespective of which sex is in post?
Well, absolutely. You will not hear an argument from me to the contrary.
And I think another thought that I had in reading that one myself while you were talking was that it's not absolutely, that's what everybody is working towards, and quite rightly it shouldn't be an issue, but it is an issue because we've got to reflect on how we measure performance, how we have designed roles in the first place, how we design bonus programs, whether this is about sort of presenteeism and visibility as part of that. You know, all of these different things of the old way of designing systems and organisations has got to be thrown up in the air, and this has to land differently to get to that proper parity. I think but it's right that people keep it on the agenda for sure, absolutely, and that it gets called out, which is why the pay gap reporting is so useful, I think. And it's certainly why your organisation and all the other ELC companies said, you know, just because we can relax it, we're not going to. And as you said, you can then share that on a global basis with a company that doesn't have to do that in any other part of its jurisdiction, which is really powerful. My final question to you, Jonathan, in listening to you is, you know, one of my reflections is as a woman, this is an easy conversation to start, right? But actually for a male leader, I don't think it necessarily is. I think it can be slightly more difficult. And you started off talking about being, you know, mindful of incumbency and not being dismissive of people who are already in the system and trying to do great things. Do you think we need to do more to support male leaders to move and accelerate the pace of change that we need?
Whether you can say we need to do more or not, but I think we certainly need to do enough. I think what we need to do is to make sure that male leaders are given the tools and the mandate to do what needs to be done to implement the types of processes that I've mentioned. So flexible working for all, changing the reward structure, changing the recruitment process, etc. So we need to, you know, empower that. I think we also need to create the right culture of, you know, kind of psychological safety where we can have these conversations, quite honest, blunt conversations about what the situation is like today and how we want to change it without it feeling like it's it becomes a blame game or anything like that. You know, so there are things that we can do to create the right culture and to create the right processes. And I think if we get that right, then it becomes, you know, much easier for male leaders to do what needs to be done.
Yeah, I agree. It's and it's really important that everyone feels confident and comfortable to be able to do that. Jonathan, thanks ever so much for your insights and for giving your time to the Powerful Women Conference today. It's lovely to see you, and keep doing all that you're doing and encouraging more. Keep raising the bar, then we'll accelerate that change you want to see. Thanks.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much, Louise. Great to be here.
Bye, Jonathan.
Thanks.